Alright, coming in at number 5, we have Bad Dream House. This segment is from Season 2, Episode 3 of Treehouse of Horror. Basically, this episode is a parody of the movie The Poltergeist and Amityville Horror. Although it's a parody and has some funny moments, there are still some more spookier moments to it. So basically, in this episode, the Simpsons move into an old house that was super cheap. Obviously cheap for a reason. As the episode progresses, we see that it is a haunted house where objects fly around, the walls bleed, and the house itself can talk to the Simpsons and manipulate them. At night, the house possesses Homer and his kids and command them to kill each other. The house whispers, "Die, die, everybody die," and "You will all die slowly," which is quite unnerving on its own. In this episode, you can see Homer and the kids going around trying to kill each other with knives and axes until they are broken from the trance by Marge. This episode is definitely on the creepier side. Moving on to number 4, we have the segments The Shinning and Nightmare Cafeteria. These segments are both from Season 6, Episode 6. Starting off with The Shinning, just as its name suggests, it is a clear parody of Stephen King thriller The Shining. In this episode, the family becomes the caretaker of Mr. Burns' mountain mansion. Now, obviously it's mocking The Shining, so Homer goes insane from the lack of television and beer, which is clearly way different than how Stephen King wrote it. However, it would have been more interesting that way. But anyway, from then, Homer is convinced that he needs to kill his family to get these necessities back. Just like in The Shining, Homer is running around trying to murder his family with an axe. He even manages to kill groundskeeper Willie, who tries to save the family. Poor Willie. Eventually, the family runs outside to escape Homer and they freeze in the snow. That's it. Classic ending. Now, there is also another segment in this episode that is also quite creepy. This segment is called Nightmare Cafeteria. Basically, this episode is all about cannibalism. The detention room in Springfield Elementary becomes so full that Principal Skinner and Lunch Lady Doris decide to kill and cook the children into the cafeteria food. They call this food Grade F meat. This is definitely a scary episode, all about eating children as a solution to overcrowding and overpopulation. Eventually, they end up killing and cooking so many children that the only ones left are Bart, Lisa, and Milhouse. Now, apparently David Merkin, one of the writers and producers of The Simpsons, wanted to put as much blood and guts in this episode as he could. He then called it the most disturbing Halloween show ever. Next, for number 3, we have the segments Clown Without Pity and Dial Z for Zombies. I always want to say Dial Z because I'm Canadian. Both these segments are in Season 4, Episode 5 of The Simpsons Treehouse of Horror. Now, starting off with Clown Without a Pity, this episode is all about an evil Krusty the Clown doll that's main goal is to kill Homer. Now, this is supposed to be a parody of the Gremlins and the Child's Play franchise. This episode starts off with Marge doing traditional Halloween games with her kids, like passing around food and telling a scary story about a witch, like this is her eyes and it's like peeled grapes that the kids are feeling, or this is her hair and it's just cold spaghetti. Did anyone else's parents do that during Halloween? Because mine did. Anyways, so in this episode, good old Homer Simpson forgets to buy Bart a birthday present. As a result, he goes to the House of Evil store and purchases Krusty the Talking Doll toy. The store owner even tells Homer that the doll is cursed, but hello, it's Homer Simpson, so clearly he doesn't care and still gifts Bart with the doll. Later on in the episode, the doll repeatedly says he is going to kill Homer. The doll then tries multiple times to stab Homer. Homer even tries discarding and killing the doll, but obviously it still manages to come back and haunt him. Eventually, Marge calls on a serviceman to come in and solve the doll problem. He simply just flips the switch on the doll from evil to good. The episode ends on a more lighter note with Krusty getting a girlfriend, Lisa's Malibu Stacy doll. Honestly, I remember watching this episode as a child and being so afraid that my toys were gonna come to life and harm me, so thank you, Simpsons. Now, this episode also has a segment called Dial Z for Zombies. In this episode, Bart tries to resurrect Lisa's cat Snowball. However, this attempt results in him casting the wrong spell and resurrecting tons of human corpses. These zombies go around town killing and collecting victims such as Ned Flanders and Krusty the Clown. All the town zombies then terrorize the Simpson family, except for Homer. They don't want him because he barely has any brains. I thought that was hilarious. However, the episode ends with Bart reversing the spell, bringing the zombies back to their graves, but sadly, those who were infected by the zombies died. Coming in at number 2, we have the segments Diddly Italy Did and Life's a Glitch Then You Die from season 11 episode 4. Let's talk about the segment Diddly Italy Did. Now, by the title, I'm assuming you can guess who the episode surrounds. Yes, Ned Flanders. This episode is a parody of I Know What You Did Last Summer. Basically, one night when Ned Flanders was out on a late night speed walking adventure, typical Flanders, Homer accidentally hits and kills him with his car. This leads the Simpsons family to becoming stalked and threatened by a secret figure in a cloak. They start to receive blood-covered messages on their house saying, I know what you did, and even on the walls in their living room. This eventually makes them all super paranoid. Then they are chased out of the house by the cloaked figure holding a butcher's hook. In the end, we find out that it was just Ned himself, who indeed was still alive. Apparently, he was turned into a werewolf right before he got hit by a car, so it made him invincible. Now, the next scary segment in this episode is named Life's a Glitch and Then You Die. Wow. What a nice name. In this segment, Homer thinks that he fixed all the computers at work at the power plant. But obviously, it's Homer, so that's not the case at all. Instead, he creates a computer virus that spreads worldwide. Chaos then ensues all throughout the world. You see airplanes crashing, appliances exploding or turning evil, and even mailboxes somehow walking. Now, the Simpsons then discover that there is a rocket that is going to go to Mars where only select people can start a new life. Homer and Bart manage to sneak their way on one rocket, however, it is filled with people they don't want on Mars. So the rocket is headed to the sun to kill them. They then decide to eject themselves from the rocket and end up exploding in outer space. A very creepy ending. This episode toys with the idea of Earth becoming an inhabitable planet, forcing people to move to Mars to seek habitation there. A reason why this episode is so terrifying is because that could happen. With the rate at which our planet is going, eventually it will be destroyed. So this episode definitely plays on real life fears. And coming in at number 1, we have the segment The Omega Man from season 9 episode 4. This episode is said to be an adaptation of the 1971 movie Omega Man. In this episode, the mayor of Springfield makes an offensive joke about France, which leads the French president to bomb Springfield. Now, this bomb ends up killing all of the residents of Springfield except for Homer Simpson, who at the time of the bomb just so happened to be in a bomb shelter that he was thinking of buying. Talk about lucky timing. Now, this is when the episode starts to get scarier. It shows Homer roaming around the town. It shows dead bodies in their final moments, and cars crashed on the streets. Now, I think the reason why this episode is the scariest is because of the fact that it could actually happen. A nuclear bomb could wipe out humanity and leave little to no survivors. This episode continues with Homer being encountered by some mutant citizens that attack him. He returns home to find his family also survived the bomb, and now they have to kill the mutants with shotguns. Besides the last part, I'm telling you, it's quite scary to watch if you think about the current situation that's going on in the world.
Number 5 on this list is the Greek financial crisis. Greece, one of the most beautiful places in the world. A destination on pretty much all of our vacation lists, I think. Back in 2015, it got a whole lot cheaper for us to go there if we wanted to as well, because the Greek economy basically completely collapsed. Now, Greece for a while had been looking like they were in trouble monetarily speaking, but in 2015 it all came crashing down. Investopedia says, in 2015 Greece defaulted on its debt. While some said Greece simply fell into arrears, its missed payment of 1.6 billion euros to the International Monetary Fund was the first time in history a developed nation has missed such a payment. So that was a really bad thing to happen, and basically meant that Greece was bankrupt. Millions of Greek citizens lost their jobs during this time. It was also a time where a lot of Greek people were leaving the country because they simply couldn't get any jobs in Greece. Well, believe it or not, an issue as complex and devastating as this one was predicted by The Simpsons. Or at least it was predicted to some extent. NME writes, the financial crisis in Greece rumbled on in 2015, hogging headlines for weeks, but the US show saw things going awry years before. Just witness this small subtle gag in the 2013 episode Politically Inept with Homer Simpson, as Springfield's world's most lovable buffoon is being interviewed on TV, a news ticker flashes on screen below with the headline, "Europe puts Greece on eBay." So it's not a direct prediction stating that the entire country's economy is going to fall apart, but putting a country on eBay paints a pretty clear picture, I'd say. Number 4 on this list is the Three-Eyed Fish. Three-Eyed Fish, not really something that I think anybody wants to see. Kinda something that you would expect to be swimming around Dr. Frankenstein's aquarium if he ever had one. Well, The Simpsons took it a step further. NME says, in a 1990 episode, Bart catches a mutated three-eyed fish in the local river, a nod to the pollutant effects of the town's nuclear power plant. Over 20 years later, in 2011, a real-life fish and practically a dead ringer for its cartoon counterpart was discovered in an Argentinian reservoir located near a nuclear facility. Now, there are a number of reasons why nuclear power has some question marks associated with it, but like, this is a major one right here. Literally a three-eyed fish, guys. And that's just one of the fish that we've seen. Think about how many other fish that are waiting to be found down there that have like legs growing out of them and stuff like that. It also makes you think about some of the horrible disasters that we've seen from power plants like this before. Obviously, Chernobyl is the one that comes to mind. If this fish happened to have this happen to it by just being around a plant, then think about what happened to the animals near that disaster. Like, we could have had a full-on mutant creature roaming around that area and just have no idea about it. Hopefully The Simpsons don't predict any more mutant stuff, because I don't want to be doing a video about how they got that right as well. Number 3 on this list is robot librarians. There's been a large movement recently, a push I guess, about how robots or automated machines are going to be taking our jobs. 100 years ago, if you would have brought this up, people would have thought that you're crazy, but nowadays it's a real thing that's happening. In fact, it's already going on. Car manufacturers, for instance, an industry that used to have a ton of jobs for people 100 years ago, is almost all machine operated now. At the end of the day, they're just simply quicker, more efficient, less accident prone, and don't need to get paid hourly. These robots are taking all kinds of jobs other than just car manufacturers as well. The Simpsons, believe it or not, actually predicted one of them. NME says, another highlight from Lisa's wedding here, as Lisa's college librarian turns out to be an android and one who violently burst into flames too. There haven't been any blown circuit board disasters in Chicago yet, but in 2011 it was announced the city's new Joe Enrica Mansueto library would have a robotic librarian who'd helpfully retrieve books for you. You know, I always thought about librarians as having a human element to them, but I guess robots would know more about books than we would. I don't know though, still feels super weird and creepy to have a robot explain to you what a book is about or something. Also, literally taking human jobs right now. Like, if they can do a librarian's job, then why can't they do a teacher's job or a business person's job or my job? Ugh. Number 2 on this list is the voting. The last time we did a video, we looked at this incident, but I think in the current political climate and the state of the world right now, it has to be revisited. In 2018, The Simpsons released an episode where it had Homer voting for the next American president. He had two options. There was Barack Obama and John McClane, who were both actually going for it at the time. In the episode, Homer very clearly clicks to vote for Obama, but the machine that he's using decides that it wants him to vote for John McClane. A funny joke and a stab at elections and voting and all that. Little did we know how accurate it was about to become though. Fast forward to the next election. Now it's between Obama and Mitt Romney for the American presidency. This time, the funny gag in The Simpsons, well, that actually happens in real life. A voting machine for Pennsylvania had to be removed because it kept changing any votes for Obama to votes for Romney. There was a full-on video that surfaced on the internet of somebody trying to vote for Obama but just couldn't because of the machine. Luckily, this was fixed and didn't cause too much of a stir in the actual results of the election. But American election scandals were far from over. Remember all the scandals about the potential Russian involvement in the election? About how they rigged the vote and gave Donald Trump an unfair advantage? We've never fully confirmed that, but basically that was predicted by The Simpsons as well if it did actually happen. It's not quite the same as a busted voting machine, but it definitely would have been tampering with the election, which was the whole thing The Simpsons were making fun of in the first place. Hopefully from here on out we can have some solid, non-messy elections and keep this Simpsons thing as it was intended to be. Just a funny joke. And finally, number 1 on this list is President Trump. Regardless of your political views, predicting a president literally decades before they actually become president is kind of a scary ability. That's exactly what The Simpsons did though with President Trump. NME says The Simpsons writers predicted Donald Trump would become president back in 2000. The episode, Bart to the Future, envisions the futures of of Bart and Lisa Simpson. The latter, with an uncanny resemblance to Hillary Clinton, has become the first female president of the United States. As you know, we've inherited quite a budget crunch from President Trump, she says to her advisors. They then inform her that her predecessor has bankrupted the country. So Lisa is literally alluding to the fact that Trump was the president and that during his presidency, he left the country in financial shambles, and now she needs to dig him out of the hole. Not totally far from the truth, honestly. How the hell did the Simpsons know this? Was this just luck of the draw? Clearly the Simpsons must know some stuff that we don't, folks. Look out for their next presidential prediction, it might just come true.
Coming in number 5, we've got horse meat. You know, a lot of shady stuff goes on in the food industry. One would hope that this kind of nonsense would be dealt with appropriately when it came to feeding children, but it's not always the case. I guess the whole feeding just children horse meat is more of a joke than anything, but check this out. Back in 1994, the 100th episode of The Simpsons aired, titled Sweet Seymour Skinner's Badass Song. It tells the tale of a woefully mismanaged public school. What else is new, right? Well, during all of the chaos where principals were fired, hired, refired, and rehired, we get a quick gag concerning some equine cuisine. Springfield Elementary's lunch lady tossed a lovely assortment of assorted horse parts, now with more testicles, into a pot to be turned into some sort of meal for the students, whatever that may be. That kind of joke has been long running, with many folks assuming that thanks to low budgets, schools have to resort to less than stellar foods. So, horse meat for the kids. However, one might think that corporations whose profitability relies on serving the food they advertise might think twice before serving horse meat in something that isn't labeled horse meat. Not quite the case. In 2013, almost 20 years after that episode of The Simpsons aired, there was a huge food-based scandal in Britain. Can you guess what kind of meat was found in all sorts of supposedly pure beef? You got it. Horse. And this wasn't just happening at dinky little school cafeterias or independent burger joints stationed near wharfs. We're talking about Taco Bell serving something that wasn't actually all beef. Which actually isn't that surprising, but still! Taco Bell, Bird's Eye, and Brakes all had products that claimed to be all beef but ended up having traces of horse meat throughout. Jeez Louise, that's not necessarily something you want to hear after scarfing down a beef skewer or a Crunchwrap Supreme. So a joke about cheaping out at the expense of the American school system actually turned out to be a pretty real situation where some corporations that should know better cheaped out. Way to go, team. Coming in number 4, we've got Mutant Tomatoes, and not the teenage ninja kind. We're talking about nuclear crops here. Enormous, bulbous, strange growth-ridden plants you probably don't want to consume. But what if they're addictive and have major profit-reaping capabilities? What then? Let's start with the Simpsons story and then move on to what happened in the world after. In the episode E.I.E.I.D.O., Homer finds himself at the forefront of a potentially brand new industry, tobacco. After skipping town to avoid a duel with a gun-toting colonel, Homer and his family settle down at his dad's old farmhouse. He buys some tomato and tobacco seeds from Sneed's Seed and Feed, formerly Chuck's, and tosses them all over the property. After introducing some plutonium to the works, the two crops become one, producing a highly addictive plant known as tobacco. Part tomato, part tobacco, all despicable. The plutonium causes this stuff to grow even bigger than it would have otherwise, reaching extremely large sizes and causing anyone who eats some of it to become addicted. Sure, the taste is bad, but think about how relieved you'll feel after you eat one every hour for the rest of your life. It's probably better for you than smoking, too. The development of this habit-forming food causes a whole lot of other issues, including but not limited to corporate espionage, rampaging farm animals, and a helicopter crash. So what did this predict? Enormous, potentially dangerous crops spurred on by the introduction of nuclear waste. In 2013, a bunch of Japanese farmers started noticing that some of their crops were growing disproportionately large. In addition to their size, these crops also developed odd properties, like additional growths that didn't match the plant's usual shapes. All this strange stuff was happening relatively close to the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, where 2 years earlier a meltdown occurred. Now, these huge fruits and veggies aren't ironclad proof that the nuclear waste caused excess growth, but it definitely paints a vivid picture now, doesn't it? We'll see what other changes occur over the next little while, and maybe even see the development of a new tobacco-tomato hybrid. It would be a better way to wean off smoking rather than vaping, that's for sure. Coming in at number 3, boring VR tasks. Video games were supposed to transport us to far-off worlds full of colorful characters and exciting things to do, right? A vision of the future where anything is possible. You could be a pro athlete, fly around on a hoverboard, pilot insane spacecraft, and more. Well, that was what the vision of video games was. Most cartoons that featured gaming would have characters teleported inside the software, taking on the roles of player characters in all sorts of far-out scenarios. However, The Simpsons saw right past that era of camp and craziness and got right into the meat and potatoes of today's legendary activities. Some popular games out there don't require you to shoot 100 aliens or ride your horse into the abyss. Some are just farming simulators or walks through the woods. Hell, there are even truck driving and food planting and serving sims that you can play in VR. Folks had such lofty aspirations for virtual reality, from the fever-dreamy interpretation of Lawnmower Man to lunatic life sims. But here we are, with some not quite consumer-ready tech and a whole lot of mundane tasks made interesting by their virtual components. Maybe The Simpsons knew that life was only gonna get drearier, and good old-fashioned hard work would have more appeal than sitting in front of a spreadsheet all day. Would you rather trim a hedge on a sunny day or input data in a cubicle? The choice is yours. Coming in at number 2, Arnold Palmer. Now this one is a little morbid. I'm sure most folks out there know about the legendary refreshing beverage named after the equally legendary golfer. Half iced tea, half lemonade, the Arnold Palmer. Well, as it turns out, a joke made by the writers of The Simpsons lined up a little too well with a real-world event. During the premiere of the 28th season, titled Monty Burns' Fleeing Circus, Homer decides to load up a water gun with said famous beverage. When Marge asks what he's doing, he tells her that he's going to Arnold Palmer Lenny, implying that he would soak his pal in the liquid. Now, this doesn't seem all that freaky, right? A simple gag pulled by TV's favorite simple dad. The thing is, on the day the episode aired, the golfer Arnold Palmer passed away. Of course, this could be chalked up to sheer coincidence, but what are the odds that they scripted, voiced, animated, and aired that joke, and it ended up being on the same day as Palmer's unfortunate passing? The world works in mysterious ways, that's for sure. And finally, at number 1, Disney owns Fox. It's almost as if the writing was on the walls for years. We like to think we've got plenty of choice when it comes to the media we consume these days, but most IPs are owned by a constantly shrinking set of companies. But wow, has Disney ever taken over a lot of stuff. And Fox was right on the money too, some 20 years before the merger actually went through. In the episode When You Dish Upon a Star, there's a quick visual gag where we see the 20th century Fox logo in all of its resplendent glory, but there's a little addendum to it. Underneath the shiny gold letters, you can see that it is now a division of Walt Disney Co. Somebody saw the way entertainment companies were growing and predicted a buyout way ahead of time. I guess it only makes sense, but wow. An insidious collection of IPs to constantly market and remarket to the increasingly online demographics of tomorrow was predicted in the 90s. I doubt they would have seen the streaming revolution coming, but the way that Disney has always been protective of its image as well as immensely profitable kinda made this one a no-brainer. Although, we only say that through hindsight. Whoever wrote this gag had foresight like no other.
Number 5 on this list is stolen cooking grease. So this one's honestly just pretty weird, guys. Cooking grease, something that to 99.9% of all individuals is just gross and should be thrown out pretty much immediately, was actually part of a bit of a thieving scandal. In the 1998 season 10 episode 1, Lord of the Dance Simpsons episode, Homer decides that a great way to make a quick buck is to steal a bunch of cooking grease and then sell it. This is a cartoon and Homer is like really freaking dumb, so we can suspend our disbelief and buy into this for 22 minutes, but never would I have actually thought this get translated to real life. In the city of New York, there's been an overwhelming rise of grease theft. The New York Post writes, "The theft of used cooking grease from city restaurants has risen in recent years thanks to the demand for yellow grease, a valuable ingredient in biodiesel," say eatery owners and licensed oil collectors. The thieves troll the streets in unmarked vans and swipe the oil going for $1 a gallon on the streets from unsuspecting restaurant workers. The oil can be converted into yellow grease, a commodity used to make biodiesel. The city's Business Integrity Commission records show that about 30 licensed grease haulers who pay restaurant to collect the grease to refineries. Haulers pay around $2 a gallon to lug the lard from the kitchens to turn it into diesel fuel, animal feed, or even jet fuel. In 2011, city haulers collected 8 1.3 million gallons of yellow grease from the 17,000 city restaurants. Like, is this not the most ridiculous thing you guys have ever heard? People going around in vans and vacuuming up gallons upon gallons of cooking grease to then turn into actual jet fuel. Like, this sounds like something straight out of a cartoon, and it actually was. Number 4 on this list is rigged voting. This one is sadly way too close to real life, guys. In 2008, The Simpsons released an episode where it had Homer voting for the next American president. His two options were Barack Obama and John McClane, who were the two actual options in real life going for presidency at the time. In the clip, Homer very clearly clicks to vote for Obama, but the machine that he's using turns his vote into a vote for John. A funny gag at the time that pokes fun at the legitimacy of elections and voting, but not so funny when it actually happened in real life 4 years later. Fast forward to the next election. Now it's between Obama and Mitt Romney for the American presidency. This time the voting machine gag actually happens though. A voting machine in Pennsylvania had to be removed because it kept changing any votes for Obama to Romney. There was a full-on video that surfaced on the internet of somebody trying to vote for Obama but just actually couldn't because of the machine. This was easily fixed and didn't cause too much tampering in the actual election, but then fast forward again 4 more years. Remember the scandal about the potential Russian involvement in the election? About how they rigged the vote and gave Donald Trump an unfair advantage? Now that's never actually been 100% confirmed, but if it did actually happen, then one could argue that The Simpsons inadvertently predicted that too. It's not quite the same as a busted voting machine, but if it did actually happen, then it definitely would have been tampering with the election, which was the whole thing The Simpsons were making fun of in the first place. Hopefully from here on out we can just have some solid, non-messy elections and keep this Simpsons thing as it was intended to be, just a funny joke. Number 3 on this list is the secret ingredient. Now when I say the secret ingredient, I'm not talking about SpongeBob and a Krabby Patty or something zany like that. I'm talking about horse meat. Yeah, that's right guys. In the season 5 episode 19 Simpsons called Sweet Seymour Skinner's Bad Song, we see the lunch lady, Doris, making some lunch for all the students of Springfield Elementary. As she cooks up her disgusting concoction, she reaches into a large vat that has the words assorted horse parts, now with more balls written on it, assumingly using this as her secret ingredient in whatever disgusting food she's cooking up for the kids. Well, this sick joke didn't just stay as a cartoon and sadly came to real life in 2013. The BBC writes, 4 beef products sold by Birdseye, Taco Bell, and catering supplier Brakes have been found to contain horse DNA, the Food Standards Agency says. This is the 3rd wave of test results received by the FSA, which has now received a total of 5,430 test results. Meanwhile, new tests conducted on beef retail products revealed no new cases of horse meat adulteration, the British Retail Consortium has said. This latest round of tests saw 1,797 products being examined. Taco Bell, guys. This is a big fast food company that got caught with its hands in the horse meat jar. Now granted, it's not necessarily their fault. They buy their meat from a big meat supplier and what's in it would have come from that supplier of meat. But this is just so scary because it makes you wonder what's in that burger that I just got from McDonald's. Sure, they tell me that it's 100% Canadian beef, but how do they know? Taco Bell had no idea what they were selling and then marketed it as something that it wasn't. So why can't these other places do it too? Honestly, really sad and scary that The Simpsons got this one right. Hopefully that was the one and only time something like this ever happens. Number 2 on this list is an Ebola outbreak. Ebola is a very serious disease and something that shouldn't be taken lightly. This is pretty much common knowledge now, but back when The Simpsons talked about it, it wasn't nearly as well known. The 3rd episode of the 9th season, called Lisa's Sacks, was released in 1997 and has The Simpsons predicting an Ebola outbreak. In that episode, Marge tells Bart, who isn't feeling well, that he should read a book called Curious George and the Ebola virus. This has led people to believe The Simpsons actually predicted the outbreak. Now just having a book called that isn't necessarily a prediction, but I do want to stress that it really wasn't talked about that much back then. Back in the 90s, it wasn't big news and not a ton of people knew about it. That's why when from 2013 to 2016 there was a major Ebola outbreak in Africa, people looked to The Simpsons as knowing something that we didn't. This wasn't just a small thing either, it was a full-on epidemic for several years that ravaged Western Africa, causing major loss of life and some serious socio-economic disruptions. Let's hope that they don't make any other epidemic predictions soon, because I think I speak for everyone when I say that we're pretty much done with that. Number 1 on this list is the Siegfried and Roy tiger attack. According to Google, Siegfried and Roy were a duo of German-American magicians and entertainers best known for their appearances with white lions and white tigers. It was composed of Siegfried Fischbacher and Roy Horn. This was one of the most successful acts in the world for quite a while and garnered a massive audience worldwide. Sadly, there was a horrible tragedy that happened in 2003 during a show. Wikipedia writes, during a show at the Mirage on Horn's birthday on October 3rd, 2003, a 7-year-old white tiger named Manticore attacked Horn. As part of the act, but veering off script, Horn held his microphone to Manticore's mouth and told him to say hello to the audience. Manticore responded by biting Horn's sleeve. Horn swatted the tiger and barked "release," while standby trainers unsuccessfully attempted to distract the cat with cubes of meat. Possibly incited by Horn's retreat, the tiger leapt at Horn, swinging at his legs and knocking him off of his feet. As trainers rushed in from offstage to assist, Manticore bit into Horn's neck and dragged him off stage. Trainers got the tiger to release Horn by spraying him with CO2 fire extinguisher canisters, the last resort available. The attack severed Horn's spine, resulting in massive blood loss, and severely injured other parts of his body, permanently impairing his motor and verbal abilities. He also had a stroke either before or after Manticore dragged him off stage. This incident, as scary as it was actually predicted by The Simpsons though in season 5, episode 10. In that Simpsons episode, both of the entertainers are viciously attacked by their tiger during one of their acts. This episode aired in 1993, which was 10 years prior to the tragic incident that happened in real life. I guess it wasn't that far off of a stretch to imagine a show with a bunch of large jungle cats potentially going wrong, but it still is really sad that they got this one right.